Fall in Time Week 10, 16th to the 22nd of November 2010. 10 weeks alone in the woods. It is a long time to be alone, yes, but it's also a long time to spend out with our civilization. There are few people who do this, and I am absolutely sure not one of them comes out of the experience the same as they entered. Being this close to and a part of nature does things to you. It makes you sense things in a different way, more completely. When the constant background hum of our busy lives is removed, then senses which have lain dormant somehow switch themselves on, and we integrate once more into the world in a way we have mostly forgotten. The 16th of November is the birth date of both my sister and my belle-mère. When I was out in the woods back in 2010, I had already considered the notion of ghost dates, those points on the calendar which once meant something. Perhaps the birthday of a friend you are no longer in touch with, or an anniversary with a partner from whom you've since separated. There is a section in my journal from this week, 15 years ago, about this, about collecting ghost dates from the past, but strangely I never considered the idea of future ghost dates. Seeing as this premise lays behind arguably the second most famous Christmas tale of all time, the idea of ghosts of the future was not one I thought of. I wonder how many more dates will become important in my life, dates I cannot predict, replacing those which slowly fade from memory. The longer I stayed in the woods, the deeper my thinking went, as though I was rid of the background noise society brings, allowing me to process and work on subjects beyond those I had previously investigated, buried deeper and drowned out. This particular adventure was not quite over, but events would soon take a turn I had not entirely anticipated, and force me into a choice between changing my plans or risking much. The sun was beginning to set on my time in the woods. If you are finding this tale of true adventure has value to you, please do consider becoming a paid subscriber. When this day-to-day account is finished, I shall extend the adventure with deeper posts, looking at the bigger questions behind the whole. You shall mostly be paid subscriber only. To catch up, head to this introductory piece, which also contains a linked chapter listing. Below is the 10th week of A Fall in Time. The Path. My journal from the 16th of November 2010 records nothing of what I actually did that day. I remember calling my sister as it was and is her birthday. I also recall taking the photographs of a woodpecker, drumming and seeking grubs above my head, moving from branch to branch of my sheltering oak. When I see greater spotted woodpeckers, I always admire their striking colours. People always comment on this, the black, white and red like an old newspaper, but they rarely mention the patterns and barring on their wings. I find the geometric shapes to remind me of First Nations beadwork, as though the woodpecker one day decided to stitch beads to itself, accenting them with a flash of red. None of these photographs are the best. They are taken through the haze of smoke from my fire, but they serve as illustrations. After dark, the owls continued to sit on the same branch the woodpecker had searched. I would hear them scrabbling and scratching above me, hooting, screeching and hissing. I often wondered if they had always sat there long before an upstart human built a home beneath, or whether they had decided to use the heat from the fire, fluff up their feathers in the updraft, as the robin, wren, long-tailed tits and others did, enjoying the smoke bath. Either way, it made me feel welcome. I remember working on my Christmas presents, tired from all the fuel processing. I also scribbled several pages in my moleskin, mostly ideas for the novel I was working on at the time. I also pondered my future and touched once again on my past. I was missing some people more than I had anticipated, and perhaps not missing others as much as I thought I would. Life in the woods was reminding me of everything I loved and missed about humanity, but it was also reminding me of all the things I was glad to have left behind. I could be myself out there, thinking, planning and writing, with no one to tut or frown. I do not like being told what to do, never have and never will. The path I am currently walking 15 years later was initially laid down and plotted during those months of 2010. I have occasionally strayed, sometimes for years, making errors which have taken me on a detour, but overall I am still walking that same route. Rereading my journals, looking through the pictures, reminds me of the state of mind I achieve when I am alone in the woods. By reading, I can come close to the same feeling, which helps banish doubts, remove any questions I cannot currently answer, and generally makes me feel more connected to what it means to truly be me. I recommend everyone takes themselves off at some point and ask themselves, who am I? Who should I be? You do not have to be quite as extreme as months alone in the woods necessarily, but time alone, or alone from those you know and who know you, is a good thing. It is best that we do not follow a road someone else thrusts us upon. Instead, go cross-country, break away, unfettered and barefoot. Follow a scent, a stream, return to a place you love, share your journey with another, discover new things, and find your own way. It is your path and only yours. How you walk it is all that matters. Listening to yourself within the woods. Out in the woods there is an ebb and flow to life. Sometimes I would record everything I did, take many photographs and immerse myself in the space I lived within. Others I would mostly stay in my shelter, warm and cozy, making gifts, experimenting with different materials, heat-treating stone, for example, or using fresher bone alongside that which is aged and weathered, drinking tea and eating well. At this point, I remember I began to make more and more bannock cakes, after I'd been ill and as the temperatures dropped. That year, I didn't have a big flat pan for making these, propped at an angle in front of the fire, rotated every so often. So I would usually make them and place them on flat rocks. It worked well. Adding raisins and more sugar than I would normally do to my bannocks seemed to be what my body was calling for. When you are alone in wilder places, it becomes easier to listen to what your body needs. Sometimes this can be surprising. You see a plant you know, and then you really crave it, or perhaps you walk along the shoreline and get a real urge to add some seaweed to your meal later. It is wise to listen to this, and wiser still to keep trying to do so when you are amongst others once more. I know I was also listening to my body when it came to rest. Every little thing out in nature is an equation of calorie expenditure, whether to go gather fuel, water, or food, or whether to simply keep warm, sleep deeply, or even go to the toilet. Everything could be broken down into these constituent parts. How much energy am I spending? This topic is one I find fascinating. We can look at all life like this, but it is only when you are alone in the woods or anywhere else wilder than normal that the equation becomes more urgent. There are so many ways to tip the scales too, ensuring clothing is cleaned and correctly worn, for example, or making sure your boots are the right size with enough room for more socks in winter, which I had not done that year, as I mentioned before. Another big plus is airing the sleeping bag when the weather allowed. I always use a silk liner inside a bag as it keeps it cleaner and adds extra warmth, but even so, it is important to fluff up the bag and to get it out into the fresh air and sunshine. For this reason, I usually choose darker coloured bags, black being good, as they absorb the sun easier rather than reflecting it, and the sun is an excellent cleanser. In essence, knowing the land, knowing the nature, and knowing yourself helps the body and mind to keep working and thriving at an optimal level. If you ever get the chance to spend time out in nature like I did, immersed, rather than skimmed or dipped into, then you learn just how much we subdue or repress this side of ourselves. The wonderful thing I realized, however, is that the instincts to do this are still there. It's just that on the whole, we're no longer listening. I truly believe we can alter that if we choose. The photos here are from the following year when I returned to my little woodland home, built a proper fireplace and oven, and experienced a much warmer and much wetter time in 2010. Loons, decisions, and a second Parliament of Owls. The hills around the Sea Loch now echo with the calls of a pair of great northern divers. It really is a fantastic, eerie, and desolate sound. Journal 2, 18th of November 2010. The Great Northern Diver is also known as the common loon. and this pair had probably flown in from somewhere to the north and west, perhaps Iceland or maybe Greenland. They stayed as long as I was there, and I suspect they return every winter. I was still not up to peak fitness, still drained by my recent illness, but the coming days would see me venture out more, exploring, photographing, and above all, observing. There were other new birds to be seen and heard, brought in with the change in the seasons, and winter was almost there. One of the things I think I have neglected to mention up to now is that when I moved into the area which was to become my permanent shelter, I deliberately collected firewood from outside a radius which could be reached within 10 minutes walking. This made gathering fuel labor-intensive and considerably harder than it could have been, but I was grateful for my foresight. The reason I did this was for the eventuality of the weather being particularly bad, meaning I could gather from near the shelter in such conditions if needed. It seemed sensible to do so, as I knew I would have more energy nearer the beginning of my woodland stay than towards the end, and this turned out to be a very wise precaution. Having been so ill meant it was days and days before I could carry the weight of logs I had done beforehand, and instead I selected local pieces of seasoned timber, laboriously pulling and dragging them to my home. Even with this, I still left a lot of firewood nearby simply because there was more than enough. At this point, I made the decision to stay out in the woods until at least December. If I made it until the 7th, that would mark the point I'd been out there for 12 weeks. This seemed like a good target. If I made it to 13 weeks, that would be a quarter of a year spent alone in the woods. Not many people approach that length of time alone in nature. I was, however, excited about spending Christmas with my parents and all but one of my 5 sisters, although I didn't want to leave my woodland haven prematurely. I kept adding to my fuel pile, building it up for the coming weeks. Another decision I had made was that I would not make the hike to the nearest village again, instead ensuring my supplies lasted as long as I remained out there, although I would have to supplement these with wild food to have enough to eat, which meant using the shore and sea as much of a land-based food was becoming scarce or vanishing entirely. On this day, my journal tells me I made a stew of sorts, adding cheese-filled dumplings and making far too much for one meal. I also mentioned that I was finding the candles and makeshift lanterns gave a superb light in the evenings, comforting and warming, lasting a long time. When the candles burnt down too small, I used the stubs for helping with fire lighting in the morning, each cut into 3 or 4 small rounds. Nothing out in nature should be wasted, and all things should go towards an avoidance of wasted effort and calories. My journal also records that I had another visitation by the Parliament of Owls, see my note from the 9th of November, but this time it did not feel at all sinister or unnerving. I listened for over half an hour as these night hunters chatted amongst themselves, rasping and coughing, hooting and shrieking, before they departed, to wreak havoc on the local rodent population or pluck small birds from their roosts. I felt truly blessed to be out there, to be healing well, and to be able to share of myself with the land itself, bring back the stories I witnessed and share them in turn with friends, family, and those reading my occasional blog posts. Sharing this today, I feel that blessing still, and I expect I will continue to do so as long as I live. The photo here is from the following year, but using the same pattern of lantern. You can also perhaps make out some of the items I collected to repurpose and use, whether fish crates or driftwood. To the right, you can see the edge of a set of shells I made from a fish box, sawn in half and nailed together, using nails pulled from wood found on the beach. Nothing should be wasted. The light which gets in through the cracks. A day of details, a day of noticing the details. The 19th of November 2010 was one full of the little components of the natural world all around me, each jumping out in the light and crying, "Photograph me." And so I did. Here I'm sharing a small selection of the many photos I took on this day. There were all manner of those details: leaves against the sky, leaves against each other, focal points, small twigs of birch, leaves which ended up flattened in the pages of my journal, tracery of branches, an airy cathedral above, a hole in a tree perfect for leaving secret messages, gnarled bark and emerald moss, honeysuckle tendrils, lichens, liverworts, ferns, mosses and others, on and around the cracks and dark places of the rocks, the damp spots and the seeps, the place where I gathered my water, the favourite tree of the tree creeper, veins of quartz, lessons in camouflage, deer leg bones, heat-treated rock, oak logs burning merrily, lens flares, shades of green which could never be truly captured by a camera. Even the air smelled green at times. Low sun highlighting, low sun shadowing, Swiss cheesed fallen trees, crevice and crack, toppled oaks and dislodged boulders, long-tailed tit not hanging around. Corona around the moon from within my shelter, and the bright, bright moonlight on the oaks, silvery skeins, ethereal, perfect for poaching. All in all, I should probably let the photographs do the talking. My journal from this day also records that I was deeply considering the mixing of photographic poetry with written poetry, wondering how to take these things forward, a thought I have yet to actually realize 15 years later. Perhaps I should dust off some old poems and find a use or home for them, release them into the woods. Short days and long walks. The 20th of November 2010 was another day of photographing the details, the vast mosaic of life all around. I was feeling strong again, well enough to walk a considerable distance, uphill and down, and up, down, and up once more. I went to parts of the woodland I had yet to explore, discovering signs of ancient habitation, places where the deer slept and watered, the exposed swirls of frost-shattered metamorphic rock, and so much more. I photographed the coal tit, the alder, a pool where 2 deer trails crossed, water droplets from melted frost, the flow and curve of the fallen tree roots, and my rather large cup of tea. The angle of sunlight was low all day now, with a month left until the solstice. Sometimes the sky was steel and the water gunmetal. Sometimes a ray would turn all into contrast and brilliance, bounce from the snow on the tops of the hills. Sea-carved rocks caught my eye, wind-sculpted oak trees, traces of otters, and an old rusted ship's boiler on the foreshore. I snapped one photo which reminded me of my mind's eye vision of Middle-earth, a deer trail winding between 2 big rocks, oaks creating a tunnel canopy above. I took a photograph of my shelter as I returned, again marvelling at how it disappeared into the land. It was a good day to be alive and breathing in the cold air without it hurting, stepping slowly and lightly through the land, not across it, but through and within, listening and scenting the wind, every foot carefully placed, considered, soundtracked by the large mixed flocks of winter tits, or the crack of the questing raven. I felt a deep relief to have come out the other side of my illness, to be able to experience a short day as any other animal on those hillsides, knowing I had a warm and cozy nest to return to as the dusk set in, and the long night enveloped me within an increasingly wintry embrace. The harsh cry of the heron. The 21st of November 2010 was another beautiful, rain-free day. Thin, wispy clouds would appear and then blow apart, dissipating quickly and leaving the sky blue and clear once more. It was starting to feel cold, not cool, but cold. Even in the middle of the day, the air had bite, and I suspected more and harder frosts were on the way. The temperature in Scotland is a strange thing. I've spoken to someone from Saskatchewan who said they felt -8 degrees Celsius, 18 Fahrenheit, in the Scottish Highlands felt colder to them than -30 degrees Celsius, -22 Fahrenheit, in their homeland. This is due to the constant humidity, the ground holding and slowly releasing moisture even during the coldest of snaps, making dry cold very rare in Scotland. It was not yet that cold, but I knew it would drop further soon. The little birds were increasingly frantic, flitting around and gathering as much food as they could, and this is usually a good indicator of a change in the weather ahead. On this day, I continued walking and photographing the woodland around me, looking at the details and wider views, experimenting with black and white shots to capture the increasingly stark feel of the oaken skeletons around me. A blanket of leaves now piled here and there, and deep drifts. I took photographs of the wonder of the bark of holly trees, of the difference in colours I was seeing everywhere, of a great tit, both on a trunk and as it flew off, the captured moment mirroring the winged lichen on a tree it had departed. I watched two shags in the loch below me and waited for the perfect moment for them to neatly line up and turn into a version of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. As it happens, there is apparently a monster not too far to the north of where I was, in Loch Morra, the deepest body of fresh water in the UK. She's called Morag. I saw the heron and captured an image just before it launched into the air, shrieking in that bone-chilling fashion they possess. A hooded crow sat on a branch, watching the foreshore. Everywhere I looked, the emerald richness of the moss and the deep verdancy of ivy seemed to leap out and demand a photograph. Likewise, with more photos of water droplets on fallen oak leaves. That day I gathered some leaves and tucked them in my first journal. I have some still, although I have also used them to write on, a special and very limited edition paper of sorts, even sending one along with a letter for publication in a literary journal, with the design for my shelter carefully inked on a dry surface. I was settled, I felt at home. I knew many of the secret paths, yet still kept finding others, such as the treacherous and narrow winding way down the cliff below my home, the way the deer would take when they wished to avoid me. I tried it once and decided it was best left to them. The early morning just after dawn was the best time to see and photograph the gossamer pendants and trails of the spider's handiwork, catching low-angled sun and fluttering this way and that. They felt special, secret, an ultra-thin strand of light decorating a branch for a small time before snapping free and heading off to who knew where. I continued with my Christmas presents, kept gathering fuel, food and water, and generally felt a sense of calm and contentment I had not felt in many a year. I was approaching 10 weeks out in the woods, and at that point I felt I could easily go another 10 weeks. I absolutely stole the title for today's piece from Liam Hearn. Awash with Gold and Ruby. On the 22nd of November 2010, the clouds started to gather, dark and thick and dusty with the potential for snow. The sun kept pushing through, stubbornly refusing to give in, and the resulting light was ever-changing and worthy of another long walk with the camera. I crossed the tracks of a large deer very fresh, and I decided to follow them. I trapped it for over a kilometre, half a mile, as it wandered slowly across the hillside, pausing here to eat, leaving still warm droppings there, twisting to look behind at one point, the action caught in the ground itself. My journal records that I caught up to it, but the wind swirled and carried my scent just before I could get my camera out from inside my clothing, where I was ensuring the batteries stayed warm and viable. He was a big stag, the largest I had seen since I had arrived in those woods, so dark in colour as to appear almost black, antlers broad and many-tined. He ran off at full tilt, bounding and leaping, and although I tried to cut him off by guessing his route and taking a shortcut across the top of the hill, I did not see him again. Tracking is addictive, and I had to tear myself away once I picked up his sign again, instead heading back to a shelter before the sun fell and the temperature dropped even more. On my walk, I also discovered a small pile of rocks from an area of land which had once been cleared for cultivation. Then the base of a set of walls from an ancient building, long taken back by the woods. Judging by the age of the tree growing beside them, they were certainly pre-clearance and likely to have been a home when Charles Edward Stuart walked these hills. I often considered this. The history of the trees could have whispered, the tales of the raising of banner and the arrival of a prince, or of chests of gold carried here, hidden there. I found where a large rock had been cracked and fallen, possibly struck by lightning, but more likely the result of frost damage. Those hills were full of such scars, the smallest acorn capable of pushing apart the mightiest rocks, or a tiny trickle of water forcing cracks into the largest of boulders. There are photographs of my favourite bog on the hills, where I had tried to see how deep it was, wiggling my staff into the depths, only to find no bottom the more I wiggled. These places need to be treated with respect, and I could not help but wonder, not for the first time, what would happen if my body ever sank within the black depths. Would I emerge Tolland or Lindau man-like many years in the future? My journal was filling rapidly, with a scant handful of pages left before I'd be forced to move on to another book. After my recovery from illness, I found a surge in my positive outlook for the future, recording many pages of ideas and thoughts alongside recipes for different steamed desserts cooked over a fire, dreams, memories, and potential dates for leaving my woodland home, when I could get a lift to my family's home in Caithness. As the sun set, just as I was getting home, everything was a blaze of red and gold and light good enough to inhale, to eat through the eyes. Familiar rocks and trees and plants took on new colours and meaning, and I kept photographing these. I was frustrated at times, my camera making a valiant attempt to pick up the correct colours, but somehow still failing to satisfy the reality. It was the most marvellous sunset. I had seen many of them and many dawns, yet I never grew weary of the spectacle. Each was different, each special in its own way. This is the way of nature and the natural world. We should never tire of it. Always able to consider the same scene and find something new, something golden and unique. On the west coast of Scotland, this is not hard. What about you? Do you follow a path you laid out years ago after long and deep thought? Do you look forward to the first frost, the first snow? Or do you dread the winter darkness? Do you take time to look at things closely, admiring all those incredible details of nature? Finally, if you're enjoying these posts and wish to support my work but do not want to pay to subscribe, you can also leave a tip of any amount. To read the introduction to my autumnal and, by this point, rather cold and wintry 2010 adventure, click here. To go back to week 9, click here. I hope you've enjoyed reading this revisited journey as much as I have enjoyed sharing it. If you have liked it, please share with anyone else you think may enjoy the adventure. I truly appreciate every share, like, and comment. I will reply to everyone who leaves a message. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than others. Many thanks for listening.